Good morning, everyone. Very happy with the introduction because very often people would say that the combination of development, cooperation and digital, they would more call it an exotic combination or an accident of how politics are often combined in Belgium. I'm really happy with the positive connotation that you give to us because I think indeed it is correct. If you want to make the world progress, if you are really serious about what we say at the United Nations, leaving no one behind, then technology and innovation is going to play a key role in that. But let me start first of all with congratulating Materialise in organizing a unique event, the most important event in the world when you look at the ecosystem of 3D printing. And I'm obviously, as a federal minister of Belgium, very proud to have that event taking place in Belgium. I understand that networking is a very important element of this event. You will see that Brussels has a lot of things to offer if you want to network, and not only here in these meeting rooms. Of course, I'm quite sure that you will have the time to experience the life and the nightlife of Brussels. Now, my idea was to talk the next 20 minutes about innovation. And the topic of innovation is, I think, one where attitude is an important one. And the attitude that we have towards innovation is not that positive as it should be or as it used to be. Very often in Europe, when we talk about technological innovations that we see taking place, there's a few things that come to mind that are actually not that positive. The fourth industrial revolution is something which will destroy half of the jobs that exist today. Big data is something that should scare us. And in a policy world, when we talk about big data, it seems that the only thing we want to talk about is about data protection and about how we should protect people from big data. It's almost like we would be afraid to talk about what the promise is, what the benefits could be, what the innovation is that we could spur from that, how we can better understand what is happening in reality, how we could use data to make the world a better place for people. No, we get stuck in one side of the story. When we talk about the big internet platforms, very often the first thing that would be discussed is how should we regulate these platforms? How should we find new regulation to steer it in one direction or another? Whereas I think the real discussion should be, well, what do we do in Europe to make sure that we create an environment where we have more of these platforms and where we have homegrown platforms and where we use the sheer size that we have in Europe to our benefit. And I think this is a key discussion. Very often, when we politicians talk to the business world, we would say, well, you need to embrace innovation. You need to be more risk-taking. You should be more entrepreneurial. You should not be afraid to fail in trying to create innovation. Maybe that also applies to us, because we push you to be more innovative. We push you to not be afraid to fail. We push you to do things which are different and which go faster than what you are expected. Yet, in a policy world today, we are not at all in that environment. And very often we would say that in the world of today, you need to learn to go fast, you need to learn to fail, you need to learn to cooperate with others. Governments, we are not there at all. Governments very often still have a very monolithic view of how we do things and others need to adapt to us. And learning how to fail is obviously not something which is in our genes. Now, some of you might say, well, governments fail already enough, but that's not the point that I want to make. The point that I want to make is have an attitude where you say, well, maybe we should try out certain things and just see how far we get. Too often, the way we organize things is based on a lack of trust. We believe that, in general, if you give people too much freedom, they would do not so good things. I think it should be the other way around. I believe that if you give people freedom in general, if you give them trust, they will rather do good things than the opposite. And so having legislation which is built on trust instead of a legislation built on mistrust, I think is a key element. I think that in the introduction you have heard about all the scientific possibilities that exist. Scientific innovation is one element. Being able to operationalize it, being able to bring it to the market is another element, and there I think governments have an important role to play. Now, let me come forward with just a few more concrete elements of how I think we should do these things. I think first of all, in Europe, there is a discussion to be had about how do we make sure that this is an environment where we become a place where technological innovation is a magnet, that we would be a magnet in the world for having technological innovation taking place. And there is often in the policy world a frustration with the fact that, if you look at internet platforms, most of them come from the United States, and it's often seen as a threatening thing. I do not think that the answer to that is to impose new regulation on that. I think that the answer to that is to create an environment in Europe where we use our size. Yes, we know that the United States is the biggest market in the world today, but we are a much bigger market. The European Union is more than 500 million inhabitants. The European Union is by far the biggest purchasing power market in the world. Yet, if you are an innovator, you will see that data protection regulation is different from country to country. You will see that copyright is different from country to country. And you will see that if you are active and you have to work in a fiscal environment with VAT, that very often you will always need one person full-time to be able to handle your VAT problems. Creating this digital single market is rightfully one of the priorities of the European Commission. And we're happy to see that, for example, in the new Estonian presidency that is starting in a few months, that we're expanding the basics of what the European Union used to be. Some of you might know that the European Union is based on a few freedoms. It's what we call the 4 freedoms. It's the freedom of movement of capital, it's the freedom of movement of people, the freedom of movement of products, and the freedom of movement of services. Finally, we are talking about the 5th freedom. And the 5th freedom is the freedom of movement of data. We are not there today at all. Throughout Europe, you have data localization regulation which is coming up, which basically says if you want to be in a certain activity in a certain country, that data needs to be localized physically in a certain country. There's a lot of reasoning that is being built around that. In my opinion, the only reasoning that is behind that, that is just pure market protectionism that you see happening. And for smaller countries like Belgium, this is obviously something that goes against the essence of the single market. If you really want to have an economic single market, then free flow of data, I think, is the basic element. And making that the 5th freedom, I think, is a very important one. So happy to see that in the creation of the digital single market, things are moving, but we will need much more than that. Second element is about education. And I talked about, in the beginning, about the attitude that we have related to innovation. And I'm convinced that a lot of the sometimes surprising election results we see throughout the world today, people would say, well, this has to do with migration and it has to do with insecurity and so on. That might be. I also think it has something to do with the prospect that people have of the future. We used to say that progress was a good thing and that progress was making our lives better, and I still believe that is the case. Still, if you continue hearing stories almost on a weekly basis that half of the jobs that exist today are going to disappear, I think you should understand that today, for a lot of people, if they look at the progress, if they look at the future, it looks like it is something which is very frightening. Now, I think that story is wrong. I see no reason why half of the jobs would disappear in the decades to come. And why is that reasoning wrong is that it goes from one basic element which is fundamentally flawed, which basically says that it is a competition between man and machine, and that one of them is going to win. That's not the case, and it has never been the case. It has always been a complementarity between technology and humankind, and one works together with the other. It's not one fighting against the other. And yes, it is true that a lot of the things that we humans execute today will be taken over by technology in the years to come. Now, is that a new thing? That's not a new thing. This has been happening over the last centuries. And if technological revolutions have done one thing over the last centuries, it's one very positive thing. Yes, it has destroyed jobs. It has destroyed poorly paid, backbreaking, and intellectually not so interesting jobs. And it has replaced them with more, better paid, formal, and more intellectually stimulating jobs, which are physically definitely not so straining. Throughout Europe, the activity level, the number of people, has never been higher than today, despite, some would say, despite technology. I see no reason why that would be different in the years to come, because there is one element which we humans have, is an incredible creativity in finding new needs. And for those new needs, we will be leveraging the more human elements that we have. And if we look at it further, the real reflection we need to have is not how do we bring more tablets and more smart boards into the classrooms. That's not the essence for me. In a world of machine learning, the key question is, what skills do we teach to our kids, which are skills that machines will never learn? And so I'm convinced that in the next decades, in our education systems, yes, we will bring more technology in our education systems, but we will be focusing just more on the human elements and maybe a bit less on the technological elements. If you look at education today, we are very successful at leveraging analytical capabilities, and that's great. That's good. But if you look at jobs in 20 years and 30 years, what will be the elements which differentiate humans versus robots, algorithms, artificial intelligence, and so on? Yes, it's analytical thinking, but it's probably also creativity and innovative thinking, and it's probably also emotions, empathy, and so on. I'm convinced that in the end, we humans will always prefer to shake a warm hand and to look into the living eyes of someone. And it will always give a value added which technology in itself cannot bring. So I'm convinced that if we want to make sure that this fourth industrial revolution is something for everyone, we will be focusing in the next years much more on the core human elements than just the story of bringing technology into the classroom. Every industrial revolution has had an educational revolution. Second industrial revolution did what? It brought everyone into primary education. Why was that? Because we needed the workforce. The third industrial revolution pushed everyone into higher education. Why was that? Because we needed more brain power. Now, for this fourth industrial revolution, what's the educational component to that? I think that the educational component to that will be continuous education. It will be making sure that everyone is always in an environment where we teach them to continue learning. Now, you would say continuous education is not so new. That's true. But if you look around you, for how many people in the population is continuous education today a reality? It's for a very small part. And continuous education today is a reality for that part of the population which is already higher educated. That, I think, will be the key challenge. How do you make sure that continuous education is something for everyone and not just for a small part of the population? Now, just a few elements on further policy initiatives that we have taken in Belgium. One of them is the tax shelter for startups. What's the idea? The idea is that you have today a much lower threshold for entrepreneurship than we've ever had. It's never been easier than today to become an entrepreneur, and that's a great thing. Still, you need some startup capital. So what's basically the idea of the tax shelter for startups? Let's say that we have someone with a great idea. The person here in front has a great idea, wants to start a business. We are looking for someone who has 100,000 euros to invest in that. Well, maybe Wilfried is the right person to do that. He's not saying no. Basically, what's the system? If you invest directly as a person in the equity capital of a starting business, should be younger than 4 years old, basically you would get a tax deduction of 45% in your income tax of any investment you do in a starting business. Tax deduction of 45%, which is a pretty big one. What is unique about it is that it is a fiscal measure. So this is not saying it's one industry, yes, one industry, no, another industry, yes again. This applies to any type of business that is younger than 4 years old. I do not believe in subsidies. I think subsidies are a way for policy and for politicians to give to some and not give to others. I believe in fiscal measures, and fiscal measures tailored to a startup environment, I think, is a very intelligent way of working. We in Belgium have also the first fiscal scheme for the sharing economy. Sharing economy, which I believe is a very important thing. The sharing economy goes into the same line of what I said about the startup economy. The threshold for becoming an entrepreneur never been so low as it is today. Still, often people would say, well, this is the gray market, people are not paying taxes and so on. I think a gray market is not a good thing. Now, as a government, you could say it does not fit our fiscal rules, say they cannot do it, or you could say, let's change the fiscal rules and let's adapt it to reality of today. What is adapting it to a reality of today? It is just asking the platforms for any transaction that takes place on that platform to themselves do a small taxation. The taxation in Belgium on that is 10%, which is, compared to the Belgian habit, actually quite low. The key element is that you ask the platform to do it. It's basically a type of transaction tax. I believe that that is the future of taxation. Taxation on profits is today still the rule. Now, we all know that in the world of today, profit is more and more a difficult concept. It's a difficult concept because we are living in a worldwide economy. It's a difficult concept because from an accounting point of view in a technological world, defining profit is more and more difficult. I think we are evolving much more into the direction of something which is more transaction-based, small percentage on a very broad scale. Another element, of course, is that the cost of collection is dramatically lower. Why do we need tens of thousands of people in trying to define what the right basis for taxation is, where you could just use technology, do this on a wide scale and a very simple way of doing it. Belgium is the first country of doing this. One thing I still want to show you related to the point I made about education. This is an aerial picture of very close to you, actually, where you are today, where you see the sign Be Central. that is the Central Railway Station. And if you look at the top right corner of the white square, where it says Be Central, a bit to the right, this is actually where you are. So the park you see there on the right, this is where you are. This is the square. What are we doing in the Belgian Central Railway Station? The 4 floors you see in that building is becoming an incubator. And you would say, well, an incubator, that's not so new. That's true, but it is an incubator specifically for projects related to education in a digital world. I talked about the importance of continuous education. We are creating an environment specifically for that. It will be opening on July 1st. The first phase is actually completely sold out now. It is sold out to all types of organizations, non-for-profit, but also commercial organizations, which offer any type of activity which is related to making people ready for a digital world. This goes from the coding projects that we offer to kids, to projects where we give people the possibility to retrain themselves in a crash course of 3 months to become coders, to initiatives where we bring elderly people in to show them that the digital world is not something to be scared about. I believe that this is the way we should be looking at education. Education happens in schools, yes, but also create an environment for any other type of organization that wants to work in this. This is opening July 1st. If any of you want to be in the center of Europe in an activity that is combining digital and education, this is basically the place that you should be looking at. I'm going to jump forward because I don't want to explode the timing. I hope you understand that I'm rather an optimist on technology. I'm convinced that that you are too. What we should be doing is do more effort to make sure that the whole public also is an optimist on technology. And actually most of them already are. Most of them use technology on a continuous basis for everything in their lives. And still the story they hear all the time is that they should be afraid about technology, is about how technology is going to make their life less free, how technology is going to endanger their jobs, how technology is being used against their own freedoms. I don't think that's the case today. And I think that, and this is the last message that I want to give to you, please do not let the discussion about technology be a discussion of politicians. If you want to have a society discussion about innovation and a society discussion about technology, you should be part of that too. Do not leave that discussion only to us. You should be part of that too. And use the possibilities that you have today. Use the technological possibilities, but also use the press. Use the cloud that you have to be part of that discussion. We need more people who are innovative in their work, also be innovative in the speech that they have. I have 2 young kids. One of them is 5-year-old, one of them is 8-year-old. If you ask them today who they are looking up to, they will tell you that they are looking up to our national football players. Now, why is that, besides that we have one of the best teams in the world, of course? They are looking up to them because they see them, because they see how good they are, because they see that they are very successful. And when kids see someone who is very successful, they will look up to that. I would hope that when they are 15 years old and 18 years old, that they would look up towards our entrepreneurs. Why would that be? Because they see how good they are. Let's give kids role models and show them people how good they are in science and entrepreneurship. If we show that more often, more people will be admirative to it and more people will be positive to it. Thanks a lot and have a nice stay here in Brussels.